This is Newsmax TV. I'm Ashley Martella. As we celebrate Ronald Reagan's 100th birthday, February 6th, we reflect on the legacy of the nation's beloved 40th president and how his unparalleled wisdom, insight, and foresight would apply today to the nation he so deeply loved and respected. And there's no better one to do that than President Reagan's eldest son, Michael Reagan. His brand new book is entitled The New Reagan Revolution: How Ronald Reagan's Principles Can Restore America's Greatness. Thanks for joining us again, Michael.
Good to be with you.
You say your father's plan saved America once and can do so again. Please explain what you mean by that.
Well, in my new book, New Reagan Revolution, I really talk about my father in 1976 and the speech that he gave before a convention. A speech, by the way, that he wasn't prepared to give. He did not even know he was going to be brought down to the floor by Gerald Ford to speak to the convention and also to those people in the world that was watching the convention that night. And it was an interesting speech. Nobody's ever written about it before because he talked about the freedoms that we have in that day, much like the freedoms that we have today: freedom of speech, freedom of this, freedom of that. And he talked about the fact that he was allowed or asked to write a letter that would be put into a time capsule that would be open on the 300th anniversary of the United States of America. And he talked about the daunting task of driving up the coast of California, Pacific on his left, the San Ynez Mountains on his right, and thought, what do I write about? Do I write about the freedoms we enjoy today, knowing that if we don't make the right decisions now, that those people who live on the 300th birthday of the United States of America may very well not have the freedoms then to even open the capsule and read what in fact he had written. He talked about nuclear proliferation, and he thought to himself, they'll know whether we made the right decisions. They'll know whether we pushed the button. They'll know whether we used nuclear weapons or not. And it really depends on the decisions we make now in 1976. Well, now we're a third of the way into that letter. And it's even more important today than it was back in 1976, with so many nuclear weapons throughout the world, with us seeing our freedoms being lost each and every day in the United States of America, whether it's freedom of speech, whether it's about health care, whatever it might be. And in fact, we don't get back to that Reagan-esque way of building coalitions and working together. We may in fact lose the freedom so much so that those who live on the 300th birthday of the United States of America may very well not be able to open that time capsule and read what Ronald Reagan wrote.
Ronald Reagan would have loved the Tea Party, in your words. What is it about the Tea Party that would have been so attractive to him?
Ronald Reagan was the original Tea Party, and I write about that in the book. He was the original Tea Party. Here was somebody who was, in fact, not very well respected by the Rockefeller wing of the Republican Party, the hierarchy in Washington, D.C. and New York City, the East Coast Republicans, if you will. He was the change. He was born out of the grassroots of America. And I talk about, in the book, getting together before my father decided to run in 1980 at the house. Nancy called us there for a meeting with my father. And he walked out of the bedroom into the living room to meet with my wife, Colleen, my sister, Maureen, myself, and I believe Patty and Ron were there also. And he said, I just got off a plane from, where was it? I think it was like Georgia. And he said, no matter where I go, Georgia, Omaha, Chicago, wherever I go, when I get off a plane, the man who handles my bag always says to me, Governor, you've got to run again. When I get to the hotel, the bellhop who takes my bag to the room says, Governor, you've got to run again. When I go up at night to go to bed and the little candy on my pillow, there's a note from the chambermaid who says, Governor, please run again. And he said, based on that, I've decided to, in fact, run again in 1980 for the presidency of the United States. And you really think about that. He didn't say David Rockefeller called him, the head of Coca-Cola called him, the head of this corporation or that corporation called him and said, please run again for president, Governor. No, chambermaids, bellhops. And I remember that night we went out for a glass of wine afterwards, my sister Maureen, my wife and I, and my sister lifted a glass of wine and said, well, if he doesn't make it this time, we're running for the presidency of the Chambermaids and Bellhops Union.
You note the coalitions President Reagan built, including Pope John Paul, Poland's Lech Wałęsa, the man who would become the first president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, and Margaret Thatcher, and eventually Mikhail Gorbachev. What was the biggest key to his success in doing that?
Because he built coalitions. He didn't make it one issue. He didn't go to Margaret Thatcher and say, you pro-life or pro-choice? And then based on the answer, say, I'm either going to work with you or not work with you. He didn't go to Pope John Paul and say, hey, tell me about your immigration policy. And then based on that answer, say we're going to work together or not. He knew the big picture. The big picture was bringing freedom to the world. And he knew the only way to get there was by building a coalition of Pope John Paul, Margaret Thatcher, Lech Walesa, Václav Havel, and ultimately Mikhail Gorbachev in order to bring the wall down in 1989. So he didn't let the little stuff get in the way of the big picture.
You noted in another interview that your father brought different factions together. Has any other president since achieved that same success, in your opinion?
Well, no, not really. I think that if you go back, honestly, you can make an argument that Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, working together, were able to make it better in America. You can make the argument that Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill were able to make it better in America. Two different parties working together towards the same end. Now, it was a battle for Newt. It was a battle for my father. But he was able, and both were able to do something very good for the country. But remember, Ronald Reagan didn't make things personal. He was able to laugh things off. He was able to use his humor to diffuse people, what have you, whether it was Sam Donaldson, Tip O'Neill, or whomever it might be. And he also never forgot who elected him, the people. So he always was able to go back to the people and tell the people exactly what he wanted to accomplish and enlist their help in them working together. With Ronald Reagan, you didn't see the word I. It was always we, together. We can do this, we can do that. And together, we did change the world.
Presidency was never about him, was it?
It was never about him from the beginning to the end. Ronald Reagan always thought of others. If you look at his gravesite, he talks about the fact that we need to be looking for the good in people. In every person, there is good. Find that good. Ronald Reagan did that. And today in America we live in, too often we don't try to find the good. We try to find the bad and get ratings.
You've seen the current President Barack Obama in operation for over 2 years now. Critics say he's very polarizing. There are many differences between him and President Reagan. What's the biggest one, do you think?
Well, the biggest difference is that it's all about him. With Barack Obama, it truly is all about him. Ronald Reagan, it was never about him at all, as we just discussed. It was about the people of this country, the United States of America, and that shining city on a hill. Ronald Reagan never, ever badmouthed the United States of America. He was appalled when Jimmy Carter really began the process back in the 1970s of going abroad and pointing a finger at the United States of America and talking about the bad that we have done in the world instead of the great things that we have done in the world that we live in today. Barack Obama is in the same mold. He believes he can go overseas and blame America for everything. You know, the Eastern Bloc countries are free today. 20 years they're free because of the policies of Ronald Reagan working together and never blaming the United States of America, but in fact enlisting us in helping others attain freedom.
In another interview on C-SPAN, you caution people not to compare today's potential leaders directly to Ronald Reagan. Why not?
Well, because I think nobody's going to compare. We didn't compare Ronald Reagan to Abraham Lincoln. We didn't compare Ronald Reagan to Barry Goldwater. We had somebody who in fact was a leader. And I think if you're looking for Ronald Reagan, you're never really going to find him. Feel lucky and proud that we had him in our lifetimes. And look for the leader, the next leader of this great movement. If you keep on looking for Ronald Reagan, you may very well walk right past the next great leader of this movement. As I said, be thankful we had Ronald Reagan in our lifetimes. And in fact, if you wake up in the morning, you yearn to be free. You wake up in the morning, you yearn for others to be free. You yearn for less government and more responsibility on your side of the equation. That in fact, Ronald Reagan is living inside of you. You don't need to look for him, just look in the mirror.
All right, finally, of the probable Republican 2012 presidential candidates, which one would your father prefer and why, and which one do you support?
My father never got involved in contested primaries. He believed that's only trouble. Because if you get involved in contested primary, the reality of it is that there's a whole lot of people who are not going to be on your team and on your side. He likes to see the party fight it out and then get wholeheartedly behind the nominee of the party. He did that back in 1976. And I tell the story about walking through the hotel room there in Kansas City and my father walking out of a room. And I say to him, what's going on? He says, well, I just met with three people. I said, what did they want? They wanted me to switch parties and start a third party and run against Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter. I said, what did you tell them? So I told him, you fight these things out in the primary, then whoever wins, you coalesce behind that person and you support that person for the presidency of the United States or the governorship or Congress or the Senate. You always get behind that nominee, that candidate. If you don't like it, then guess what? Find a better candidate.
Once again, the name of the book, The New Reagan Revolution. Michael Reagan, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us here at Newsmax.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.